piracy or preservation. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
You can't keep a good format down.
Retro piracy running rampant.
Hard driving, still going.
All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? We have a special guest on this week. We have Ben. Ben, you're from a company called, is it Plaion or is it Plaion? I always thought Plaion.
Oh, definitely Plaion.
Yeah, intentionally Plaion. Plaion are a hardware manufacturer, and they have recently made the 2600 Plus. They are making the 7800 Plus. They are involved with, I think, with Retro Games Limited and helping distribute and manufacture their stuff.
Yep.
And they have their fingers in lots of different pies. They have software studios as well. All sorts of stuff going on in Plaion.
Yep. I'm responsible for the retro area. So as you said, there's departments full of developers and distribution and games for modern consoles. But I have a little segment where I look after the retro area.
You're not paid to be here. You haven't paid to be on this. This isn't sponsored or anything. He's on because Reese got chatting to you and realised that not only are you one of us, but you're probably even more than that. So like Richard Horn from last week's episode, I think Ben will be a fantastic and fascinating guest who really knows what they're talking about and is an enthusiast for our hobby. So you're not here to be interviewed about Plaion, and you're not going to be interviewed about the topics you're in charge of there, but we will ask you a few questions. How's your week been, Reese?
Busy. Yeah, busy. I got the video out of the door. There was a bit of a controversy with that, but we got there in the end. I got some good feedback from some very knowledgeable people.
I enjoyed your video. Tiny computers. Really interesting time capsule, pun intended, about UK PCs in the late 90s. How's your week been, Ben?
Very busy. We're just getting into the manufacture stage for the 7800 Plus. And aside from work, I've been playing a lot of video games. I've been just doing the standard family stuff. But yeah, it's been hectic to say the least.
We're going to get straight into story one. We've got 3 stories today, which I think we might end up speaking too much about. So we'll go straight into story one. And I think it's widely accepted that we live in the best time for retro gaming. Other than the prices in old hardware not being the 2003 car boot sale prices, or if you're in America, the yard sale prices, everything is great. We can emulate almost anything. There's fantastic things in terms of handheld system and a chip emulators. We have FPGA emulation if you want to spend a bit more. We have modern PCB remakes where you can transplant the custom chips along with a new set of components to make a proper micro from scratch or nearly from scratch. There's new cases. There are hardware upgrades like better keyboards, like power replacements, like video output, like storage updates. It is the best time to do it for hardware. We also have YouTube tutorials. We have decades of information that's mostly been preserved since back in the day. And of course, that is just the hardware. We have new games being made all the time. Now, more than ever, I think, since the systems were in there, we're going to talk about them as if they're stars, like their main sequence. And in fact, Nintendo and so on are reselling their back catalogue. So when we've talked about DOS gaming, we've talked about good old games and how Steam still sell loads of games for the past 30 years. It's a great time. But a relatively recent addition to things is today's submission. It's from Dr. Local, and it's about new cartridge releases. I know that in the homebrew scene, even in the quiet times, this has always happened, but it's really picked up in recent years. The article goes on to mention, first of all, and I think it's fair to mention them first, the Evercade. The Evercade is a series of hardware releases. Some are handheld. One is now that the Versus one is a traditional console with carts that work in them, and the carts typically, rather than having a single game on them, they have a collection of games on them. it's a great compromise between a single game and a cart and the misery of a big list of games on a menu and a flash cart when you load them up, which we don't like. Evercade have done some great stuff, and their curated collections are a great way to do it, and they've really carved out a market that didn't exist for themselves. There's also limited run games who do premium re-releases of older games, some with enhancements, etc., but most of the time just with trinkets. And I'm not a fan of limited run games. I've never forgotten what they did with PC games. They just don't seem to be making them for me. I feel as if they make collectible ornaments rather than games to be played, but I'm not into the console side of things, so it's possible that they're doing something more than that there. I know they do actual console cartridge releases. Now, the article talked about special cartridges too, like the 2600 Pitfall 2 cart or the Super FX chip on some of the Super Nintendo carts. But of course, the one I've missed out, and the one I wanted to leave to last for obvious reasons, is of course Atari. The article talks about the 2600 Plus and the new 7800 Plus. The 2600 Plus is a slightly smaller, but not noticeably smaller, I think, unless they're side by side, of the iconic VCS, the 2600. Atari's console that had a really long life with the wood grain sitting behind Reese, with the wood grain that everyone recognises. They're now coming out with the 7800 Plus. It's a next step for them. And the article mentions, and I think an important thing about what they're doing is the backwards and forwards compatibility. Meaning for the most part, the 2600, the 7800, the 2600 Plus, and the 7800 Plus carts, controllers, etc., should work on each other. Now, we've covered all this in a recent show, so I won't want to repeat all that again. But today, our guest is the man behind it all. Ben from Plaion made the 2600 Plus and the 7800 Plus. So I've got a few questions for you, Ben, if it's all right.
Fire away.
No pressure to answer any of these. Has it been a success?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, whenever you start these things, and don't want to sound boring, but you always start off with just projections of sales and that. And the 2600 Plus was decently higher than our projections, and I think it also was wildly successful in terms of social media interaction. You know, places like Atari Age, YouTube, there's hundreds of thousands of views and millions of views and posts about them all. And, well, we certainly wouldn't be making the 7800 Plus and all these cartridges and new accessories if it wasn't. I mean, it is a niche area. It's still niche. But with small teams and the ability to manufacture at good pricing, the ability to have RRPs at decent prices as well, just seems to make it work. So far, so good.
Is there more coming?
I think I'm always thinking about what Atari have said publicly, and I think both Wade and there was a video recently from Matt Burnett indicating there was more stuff coming. I mean, it's pretty obvious that if it continues to have the success, I'm hoping somewhat for a snowball effect, in that you bring more and more product out, and you just have this weight of more and more coming out, and people are more interested. People are interested in having collections, particularly of new games and re-releases. So I think it will certainly continue. I mean, we talk about it all the time, to be honest. But at the moment, it's getting the 7800 out, getting the games out, and then we'll see what comes next. I hope to bring some stuff out early-ish next year, some more additional lines. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Why can't I pre-order the carts that are due out in November on Amazon yet?
I believe there's some kind of technical difficulty with some of those lines, but it will be cleared. I mean, everybody can order them across Europe and America. I think the UK's... I think that for sure the consoles and the accessories are up, but
yeah,
some kind of technicality, I don't know.
And what happened to Food Fight?
Yeah, Food Fight was my mess up, really.
No, there's no pressure to answer this question, Ben.
No, not at all. It's publicly available information anyway. It was one of
I
those
only ask
occasions.
because my pre-order was cancelled.
Yeah, it sucks. I've got a few thousand in a warehouse sitting there for me to decide what to do with them. But the thing is
bury them in the desert.
Yes, meaty style. The thing is that I sit at my desk at work and I'm delivered cartridges, I'm delivered machines, I'm delivered everything all the time, and I just sit there plugging them, playing them, making notes. Does it work? Yes, no. And then we just go from there. Send stuff out to other people, and they test it as well. But for Food Fight, I was testing it, worked perfectly. 50 hertz, PAL, 60 hertz NTSC, all fine. And then we'd manufactured the units, and I got sent some production run versions. And I don't know, how did it come about? Oh, yeah, that was it. I didn't have my normal machine. My normal machine has got the latest firmware on it, so everything works on it. And I didn't think to try the launch firmware of the 2600 Plus. If you remember when the 2600 Plus came out, there was very good compatibility, but not perfect compatibility, or not near perfect compatibility. And god damn it, Food Fight was one of those, just black screened on me. I have these kind of moments all the time in my career where it's just like it's an abyss of thought of like, oh my God, I've got thousands en route. And I think in the case of Food Fight, we'd actually sent them to retail as well. So I'm pretty sure not all of them got recalled, and there are some out there. So yeah, it was a ghastly experience, as I have them on a regular basis. But there are always highs to these ghastly experiences. I think what I'll do is basically, I think all it requires really is a sticker on the box to advise people to update their firmware. Then it will be fine. It's just I have a bit of a responsibility to make sure that we don't get lots of returns. Everything has to work. And it's like, it would be a nightmare. But I haven't seen any come back, to be honest. I checked the other day. So those people that have probably got some, if they've snuck out. I think Australia sent all those out. I can't remember. It was some territory. They must just update their machines. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that is regrettable, but you have to learn from it.
Yeah. What was behind the decision? And this is the big question, I think. What was behind the decision to make a console that took cartridges? Because that's other than really the Evercade, that's the big thing that separates this from the minis that we've seen come out over the years. What was the reason behind putting the cartridges in there?
Well, I was born in 1978, and that was the year that the Atari 2600 came out. And really, it was the start of home video game consoles with interchangeable carts. And, you know, we were talking to Atari about other things, and then just out of the blue one day, the guy said, "Oh, we'd like you to manufacture the 2600 Plus." And I held it down on the call a little bit, but as soon as the call finished, I was just ecstatic. Yeah, proper. Because you started off talking about the history of video games and this timeline it's had up until now and how good everything is. But it's such a compact timeline from 1978 to say, I'd say PlayStation 3 era was when it peaked. You could go into a 3D world, you had full stereo sound. It was perfected. And since, say, maybe late PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, it's just been incremental gains in graphical, rendering and that. Whereas from 1978 up until that period, there were generational shifts that truly changed every time. And because I was born in that day and I went through it all, it's just such a fundamental part of my being, my life. I bought them all. I had them all. I went through all these things. And when I was offered the chance, I just really thought, well, what do we need to do? And if you think about it, I'm in the game of making retro video game consoles, and this is like almost a reset, a chance to tell the story from the very beginning. So don't mess it up, Ben. And what do people want? People want authenticity, and people can have whatever they want, download anything they want off the internet. But there's that aesthetic quality, that touch of having something in your hand that you own this cartridge, you own it forever. And it was an absolute no-brainer that it had to be cartridges, and then it had to play original cartridges. And then I remember Atari brought it up. It says, "Oh, yeah, we want you to make sure that 7800 games work on the 2600 plus." Honestly, I tried so many times to dissuade them because of the complexities of having two emulators to dump two types of cartridges. So, Ben, it's easy. It must be easy. It's just the same size cartridge. And obviously it wasn't that easy, but the 2600 plus was actually delayed in release because of the inclusion of 7800 compatibility. We just had to get it right. It just took so long.
I think it's the right decision though, because you now have this choice of which one to buy. That is really just about how it looks to you, because it's the same gubbins inside, at least more or less the same gubbins or compatible gubbins.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I regretted me trying to stop them doing it. It was one of the best things that could happen, is it having 7800 compatibility, because with the 2600 you have those simple 5-10 minute games and you have that hit of nostalgia. But when you get to 7800, it was a generational leap, and things were, deeper. Games were longer.
There's almost 10 years between the two releases.
And I was so pleased, and they kind of do work together as well, to see the 2600 and 7800, same cartridges, same kind of artwork on everything. So I was really happy that they persevered with me, and I persevered with the developers to get it working.
Yeah, I was very pleased to see the 7800 compatibility on the 2600 plus, because I've always had a soft spot for the 7800. I've always thought that it was a very underrated console, and one that was kind of forgotten by history, really. And it seems that it's had this kind of revival and a load more interest in it, and I think that is all directly off the back of the 2600 plus. So very pleased indeed to see that.
I think the decision to put cartridges is the only reason why I bought the 2600 plus. I wouldn't have bought it if it was a mini without that. I think that's what has it crossed the line to being an emulation device that has a list of games and something that I want to have. And just because I love original media, I love discs, I love cassettes, and I love cartridges. So that's what the appeal was for me. I was going to ask you, can you tell us anything about future designs without losing your job? Is there anything that you'd like to tell us that you can tell us? Or is it all a case of Atari need to tell us first and you can only say what they've said already?
Yeah, I think so, because this just wouldn't be fair for me to just give too much away. But, I mean, it seems relatively obvious to me if you look at the machines that they have, and like I sit there reading all social media and Atari Age, and we take it all in. And in fact, there are games that come out at the moment, these 10 games that are coming out with the 7800, that directly really come from feedback from the community. And there's further ones planned as well, with definitely direct feedback from the community. And
so which month next year is River Raid coming out in?
Oh, wow. When you look at the landscape of games that you could bring out, you have to consider again that it's small teams, niche products. So you have to look at the path of least resistance to getting a game out. So first of all, we scan the Atari catalog. Do they own it? Yes. Do they own the game code? Yes. Then it's an easy one. When you come to third parties and you think of the size of the owner of that intellectual property that you talk about, sometimes it's difficult just to even engage. And even with an engagement, you'll say, well, I think we'll sell X thousands of units, and it may not be very interesting for them. I mean, we have got licensed third-party products on the way. But more details for that will come at a later date, I'm sure.
Okay. Very interesting. I didn't expect to get an answer to that at all. But there's a few games I've said to myself, no, Dave, don't buy a second-hand one. Just wait until they come out. Eventually it'll come out. And I hope that happens. I appreciate the position where you can't tell us too much, though. About yourself, though, I was going to ask about yourself, not in your job, just as an enthusiast. Do you like original media? And you've already answered that. You've already said yes, you do. Yeah. There's the tactile feeling of putting something, that chunk as you put the cartridge in, or the little noise you get when you put a disc into the drive or put a cassette in. There's something real about that isn't real about menus of games.
Well, that's our lives. That's what we did when we were younger, and there is a bit of nostalgia to it, I'm sure. But I was talking about this with my daughter last night, and she was talking about the difference. She's a teenager, so she's of a totally different generation to me. And it warmed the cockles of my heart when she wanted a book. She reads books. I says, oh, look, you can get the Kindle one for free. And she went, no, I'd much prefer to have a proper book. And it's $9.99. I says, why? And she says, because it's in the hand. It's the smell of it. It's everything about it. And, what happens if I lose the Kindle and that? I was like, yeah. Now you realise why I'm bringing cartridges out at the moment for the retro scene. It is that.
Yeah, it's the same with vinyl records and CDs and tapes now.
Video games as well, I think, have got a bit of a different one because it happened to film and it happened to music, but those mediums were actually always very much lower in price. A DVD, $9.99, same with the music. I can always remember going to an online store to buy a downloadable video game, and it's $59.99. And I always think, wow, I almost want to have something in my hand to warrant the purchase. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
and
like, wow.
They undermine that as well. When you do go to buy them in the shop now, you get it, and you need to use a code to play it. Or at times, you open it up and there's just a code in there.
Yeah, I think Nintendo still are shipping all their games, aren't they, with the full code on the cartridges, which is a great thing, and I hope it continues. But then again, I do download games all the time as well. We can have everything. It's not one or the other, but I love it. But but obviously I always download games as well, so it's choice.
You can't ever beat something like that.
Yes.
Cascade 50. Reese, you haven't said much today.
No, just absolutely fascinated listening to Ben because, as you know, I am a huge Atari fan, and getting the inside scoop on the kind of stuff that they're working on is very interesting. So I thought I'd let him speak. But yeah, on the subject of the whole cartridge thing and downloadable stuff, obviously I have a modern Steam PC. I do buy a lot of games on there, and that's perfectly fine by me. But as you probably also know, I'm quite a big collector of physical things as well, and you can't really beat the the tactile feel of the box and the manual and the cartridge and everything else. And yeah, I mean, I bought the 2600 Plus. I bought it on release. In fact, I actually ordered it from America before they announced that they were going to be selling them in the UK, and then I couldn't cancel that, so I ended up paying a fortune on shipping and ended up with two of them. But that's fine. But yeah, as far as like the other mini consoles, like these, the ones with all the built-in games and stuff, I've never really had any interest in them at all. But because this took physical cartridges, it was like, I can use my cartridges with it, and I have an excuse to buy even more of them. So it has to be a good thing.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, the minis. I don't want to bash the minis that don't have cartridges. They're fine if that's what you want, and they're fine if you don't have another way of doing it. They're ideal for that, but they're not for me.
Well, the one thing for me that obviously is very advantageous is that because it has cartridges, the ability not just to play old ones, but also new ones we bring out, you feel that the machine is not dead on release. Like with everything packed on, they're great, loads of games and that, but it gives you the ability to have a roadmap going forward and to add further games and accessories that keep it all alive, that hopefully keeps the machine having a nice stable tick over run rate and just keeps it all going. Because if, like you say, if we'd have just made a 2600 Plus and stuck in Atari's catalog on it, that's it. Might have done really well in the short term, but it would just generally then peter out. You'd have to do something like what At Games did with Flashback and bring them out an iteration every year. But, well, to me, I think that the way of going a cartridge route and original accessories is a more authentic one and a more exciting one, I think, because people are excited they own it, and it's like, wow, there's something new coming out. Feels great.
I've got a question I've remembered about. Will the new accessories, the wireless controllers, work on other retro PCs? So could I plug in the wireless, is it CX30 Plus to my Atari ST?
Is it DB9 connector?
Yeah.
The thing is, they're not all wired up the same. So I've got it here, actually. A little dongle. What's it?
A dongle, yes,
Yeah,
a dongle.
Yeah.
I know the original CX78 pads don't work on the ST without modifying them because it confuses the
Yeah, you can get
that's
these.
why I said this. That's why I said the 30.
Yeah, you can get these adapters that make them work. For example, on a Sega Mega Drive, or vice versa on the Atari. But no, I mean, we know that it obviously works on the 2600, 7800 original machines and R2 machines. Whether it works on any others, I'm not sure, to be honest. The one thing I can tell you is that
I think it will.
They do ship. This is quite an interesting one, and a slight deviation to our normal way of doing things is that we, as actually a request from Atari is, Ben, can you ship it with two dongles, one DB9, one USB?
Oh,
so it comes with a USB dongle, and yeah, I mean, I tried it.
That's a scoop.
Yeah, I tried it about a month ago, straight into the back of the PC. PC sees it as an Atari wireless controller. I went straight onto some URL that played Atari games instantaneously, and it worked fine. So people will be able to, have the option to use it on certainly PCs, and I guess other devices that have got a USB port that you can control from.
I'm just thinking about most certainly microcomputers that came out after the Atari 2600, the Atari VCS 2600, used a standard Atari joysticks. So it should work on most of those, and that's what I was thinking about, and nobody seems to have mentioned. There we go. There's one of those little pads, and Reece, you can actually modify one of those to work in a 2600 or an Atari ST or something else.
I have. In fact, apparently this is one of the modified ones. It's just the first one I picked up. But yeah, I think the way the second button was implemented originally, I think it was something to do with the paddle input, I think. And
it's
because hey, when they originally designed it in the kind of mid to late 70s, I don't think they were expecting anyone to ever need more than one button. So that was the way that it was, and they kind of had to improvise. But
yeah, very interesting. So cartridges are back. Go and buy cartridges, not necessarily Ben's ones, but buy Ben's ones. We are sponsored by PCB Way. PCB Way make all sorts of things, not just PCBs, but mainly PCBs. PCB Way will make you the PCB that you want. They can pre-populate it. They can do lots of soldering for you. They can do loads of other things, though. They can do 3D printing of various different types. They can do CNC milling. And for me, the thing that I like most about PCB Way is the shared projects that they do. You can go and look at lots of different things, from home automation to retro add-ons and replacements. Find a little simple project, order it delivered to you, and do your first little bit of soldering there. PCBWay.com for all of your PCB needs. Thank you for sponsoring us.
So here's a story that's been submitted by Malcolm851 and Pre-Film over on the subreddit this week, and it certainly struck a chord with me. I know that the ongoing debate about piracy versus preservation is something that Dave has expressed opinions on in the past, many a time. So I'd be interested to hear your take too, and of course Ben's, as he's very much in the business. But first, allow me to explain. So this is something that the BBC News are describing as a video game trafficking ring, which sounds very grand, doesn't it? And has apparently been dismantled in Turin, Italy this week by the country's Economic Crime Unit. leading to games reportedly worth over 50 million euros, which is $55 million or £42 million, being seized. And I know Dave has thoughts on this, so we'll talk about those in a second. We don't know the exact nature of the devices involved, but they're described as being imitations of classic consoles from Nintendo, Sega, and Atari, manufactured in China and apparently not complying with strict EU electrical safety standards. So, how many of those consoles were confiscated? Around 12,000, apparently, reportedly holding over 47 million pirated games. And for those who are as terrible as at maths as I am, I did run the sums for you, and that works out at about 4,000 games per console. So very much these kind of multi-game console things that you see for sale. The BBC names Mario Brothers, Street Fighter, and Star Wars as three of the classic game franchises involved, so it's not hard to guess the nature of these devices. And I'm sure we're familiar with them from places like eBay and Amazon, all-in-one arcade sticks, handheld type things, and the like. And I'm sure a lot of us own something like this too. Now, I must admit, I am conflicted on this. I agree that preservation of these old games and making them accessible is important, and I'm generally of the opinion, I know there are exceptions, that the original developers made their money decades ago, and they don't tend to see a penny from the modern repackaged re-releases anyway. But sellers loading up SD cards with thousands of ROMs and flogging them on eBay for a profit doesn't really sit right with me either. It also reduces the games to nothing more than an endless list of names on a list, which is something that we've already mentioned in this episode, which to me I think is quite sad. You have none of the magic of that tactile experience, opening the box, reading the manual, and so on. And I do feel that's an important part of the nostalgia for me. So they're my thoughts, but I would be very interested to hear how you two feel.
Well, I'll go first then. The 50 million euro valuation is incredibly wrong and unhelpful. This wasn't 50 million. They've been doing this since the 80s. Lost sales because of piracy, and it's not that. They multiply these numbers up to give the highest thing they can for clickbait, and the BBC should be doing better than that. These are cheap devices that people buy on a whim, and they contain games that 90% at least of the games will never be loaded. So the idea that they've lost a sale from that is inaccurate. However, they're all janky as well. But however, they're janky, and the electrical safety thing is a thing. Mark Fixie's stuff had a fire, lost everything in his house because of it, and I now don't like to plug in anything unless it's safe. I don't use the generic brandless USB charger things that come with it. I use my own now.
I have everything in the studio here on smart plugs, and they're all Philips branded, proper ones. And last thing I do every time I leave is I just have a button on my phone that just shuts the whole lot down.
I've got the same in here with IKEA plugs in this room. As for the argument about copyright and public domain and so on, I feel that after a certain amount of time, things should enter into the public domain. But the reality is that when I buy a cart for my 2600 Plus, I'm not buying it because that's the only way I can get hold of the game. I have oodles of different ways to play the game. I can play it in a browser. Ben, you mentioned you can play it in a browser. I've got emulation devices. There's nothing stopping me playing them. And the file sizes for these Atari cartridges are so small that you couldn't get them off the internet. I'm buying them because I want to have it in a nice package. I want to buy it in a way, in a format I can hold in my hand. I can play it in a nicely curated way. I don't think the Pandora devices are too harmful. However, I think they're more of an entry into the hobby for some people. I think some people just want to buy something at 50 quid, grab it, and just play some old games. And they might do it for an hour and then stop. And they'll go on to something better like a 2600 Plus or like a Mister or any of the other things. They're limited, they're glitchy, and there is better out there. I'm much happier, though, seeing people just selling the hardware. And even if it is trivial to go and get the ROMs, don't sell the ROMs along with the hardware. But I'm surprised to see they actually bother to do this in Italy, because you can go into Amazon.co.uk today and buy the same devices from Amazon shipped from the UK. It's not the case that you can't do it already. You can go to these the manufacturers like Powkiddy, for example, and get one of these handhelds delivered, and it will come preloaded with loads and loads of games they don't have the copyright for. So I don't know why they're bothering.
Woo! I don't know how to even answer because I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper here. I recall, how old would I have been? 15? It was the first business that I started at school. I imported Super Wild Cards into the country from Hong Kong. We only sold 2 or 3. But yeah, I mean, that kind of thing's always been part of my life. But I mean, where do I start? I mean, we want to sell cartridges, but I don't know whether, we were talking about films and music and TV earlier. The method that you could get those legally obtained, I know we had our time on the internet with, was it Napster and things like that, but the companies that had those music and those films quickly adapted to it, and then we had streaming services, and they sold them online, so they quickly adapted. I think the video games industry is, I know you can get them now, and obviously you can get things on Steam, but it's been slightly different, hasn't it? That, like, I went on to Nintendo's online service where you can have these free retro games if you pay their yearly subscription, and it was pretty good. But
free, that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. But it was pretty good. But I just wanted every single one there. I wanted to play obscure titles that I remember as owning as a kid, and it wasn't there. So I wonder whether it's because people aren't pirating, people aren't buying these devices online on a whim. They want that experience, so they get whatever they can. But I think if companies can provide means of enjoying that intellectual property and those games, and legally, I mean, it always sounds weird to start saying stuff like that, then it should be encouraged and it should continue. And if I can play a tiny part in it, then that's okay with me.
It comes down to quality for me. If you want, I mean, there's nothing stopping you having these Pandora devices, but there's no way that it's the same quality as having an Evercade, for example, or the 2600 plus. It's just not the same. It's they're cheap devices and they do lots of things, but they're not as good as having a better curated experience. And I think that's why. I mean, I don't think anyone buying the 2600 plus is buying because it's finally a chance for them to play Atari games again. They weren't stopped from it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, my experience with some of these things is you go through and they've got lists of thousands and thousands of games, but you actually try to play any of them, and some of them are like weird ROM hacks, and some of them are in the wrong language and
stuffed bean ale,
really badly curated. Yeah.
I think your second story is kind of riffing off this, isn't it?
It is, yes. Thank you for that fantastic setup there, Dave. On a similar note, there was also a related story submitted by Wade Turtle, and this one comes from retronews.com. It's short but sweet, but it's essentially a post on the Game Boy subreddit from someone who spotted a counterfeit/repro Pokemon Yellow game for sale in GameStop, of all places. Now, this is something I do have some experience of, because I collect games for the Atari Jaguar, and I'm actually 2 games off the complete set.
Wow.
And if you know anything about the Jaguar, you'll probably be able to work out which 2 games they are, because they're insanely expensive. And every time you see Jaguar games for sale, there's always repros, and they're not always clearly identified as such. And there was actually an early video of mine that I did on my channel, which was about a very poor quality Cybermorph repro, which is a really weird game to want to make a reproduction of, because it was actually bundled with the console. But someone had done a really dodgy copy of the box. But yeah, I don't think people creating reproductions for their own display purposes are particularly problematic, but I think it does cross a line when someone tries to pass it off as the genuine article. Of course, I think in this case, I would give the GameStop employee the benefit of the doubt, and they probably had no idea when they priced it up and stuck it up on the shelf.
Well, GameStop need to work out how to prevent that. But yeah, I don't have any issue with people producing reproductions for their own personal use. As long as they're marked as that, they don't go into the market. But I'm much happier that we live in a time now when Plaion are making cartridges that you can buy and have original cartridge that was made in 2024. I think that's much happier for me than a reproduction or a smelly old cartridge that looks as if it's been in someone's school bag for years.
I think that somebody selling cartridges that are direct copy with like the Nintendo seal of quality on it and all things like that, and then because you're ripping the person off, aren't you? Because I buy Pokemon cards with my son, and there's a huge market in fake Pokemon cards, and it's
I didn't know that.
Oh, it's massive, and he has like cousins and friends that buy them, and they'll have a genuine, quite valuable card, and they'll go and swap it and for something that looks nice. But then I've seen it and I went, oh, I'm sorry, that's not real. And they're gutted about it. So that is not a very nice situation to have when people expect something to be authentic and then it turns out not to be. That really sucks, especially when it's kids.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. No, I just hope that we have more things like the Atari 2600 Plus. I've talked about wanting there to be a Super Nintendo, a mini, not even a mini, but a new Super Nintendo that takes original and new cartridges. Surely Nintendo must be watching what Plaion are doing and Atari are doing and seeing we can do that, surely.
I mean, it would just melt the internet, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would
imagine them all coming back.
Yeah.
And
Jaguar Plus. That's what the world's waiting for.
Jaguar. Ben all but confirmed the Jaguar earlier on in the show.
Incremental steps. Step by step, generation by generation.
The links first, then. That's what he said. Ben said nothing of the sort, by the way. Nothing of the sort.
Atari ST Mini.
Yeah, never happening. Ben's an Atari. Ben, you're an Amiga fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I had an Amiga. I've basically went through everything, like I was saying at the beginning. Had a 2600 with River Raid, my favourite game on it. And then in contrast to you, I think, Dave, I actually went more through video game consoles than video game computers. I think after the 2600 Plus was gifted down to us, so I was
2600, not the Plus.
Sorry, the 2600, yeah. And that was
from Doctor Who. Out of his TARDIS.
And back. But it's funny that Neil's not here because my first computer that we bought that I played on was the Amstrad CPC 464. Clearly, I went for the angle with my mum and dad that it was an educational thing. Yeah. And I always love this when I say yes. And the first thing I did was play Operation Wolf. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning. And then I've just gone through primarily more Nintendo, Sega. Mm-hmm. I used to import Japanese copies of Super Nintendo games. I was so deep into it. I think my best friend was one of the first to buy a Street Fighter 2 Japanese copy for the SNES that imported it into the country. And I went on that journey. And then only, say, in the last 10 years, I've heavily gone back into PC gaming, building PCs. I love building PCs. And funny to go like this from the previous topic, but then the ability to easily get games from Steam was also an advantage. So it's that yin and yang, and both are fine, aren't they?
Yeah, you're right. I wouldn't want to shut down Steam and have to buy all our games physically again.
So ultimately, I have a Mister with a curated collection of games for various systems on it. Some that I've owned over the years in some form or another, and some that I wanted to own but never had the chance. And is that really any different to buying the game secondhand on eBay?
Housekeeping time with Dave is here. Have no fear, he'll keep things clear. His is housekeeping time with Dave.
I'd like to welcome 3 new patrons this week. Paul and David and Mike, thank you very much for signing up to be patrons. We now have 150 patrons. Thank you so much for your support and encouragement. It really does help us keep going. If you'd like to join our patrons, where can you go, Reese?
Patreon.com/thisweekinretro.
Thank you very much. There's a small update from Ian, the guy who made Pigus, which was now known as Pico Gus. The latest version of the Llama ITX, that's the system on a module that we spoke about last week, the breakout board for the system on a module aimed at DOS and Windows 95 gaming, has a Pico Gus built in. And, Reese has the official Pico Gus box there, the retail box there. So that gives you Gravis ultrasound. And I was stretched to say that a Pico Gus is a brilliant way to solve the need an old chip problem that we had for it. So we're now down to just needing an AGP graphics card on that project. And if we have the AGP graphics card solved with something, I don't know, then it can be made from all new stuff. I guess some kind of PCIe graphics card that has functional Windows 95 drivers and DOS compatibility, then we can have an all-new DOS board. Not much else housekeeping this week, so we'll go on to briefs. And the top submission this week is rest in peace to James Earl Jones. While he's not got a direct retro tech link, he's certainly in all of our memories with all the work he did across Star Wars and all sorts of different things. Next is from 42 Nobody 42, and it's a heavily stickered eMachines PC. It's just a picture of this eMachines PC. It's a 566 megahertz Celeron, so that dates it to around the millennium. It has stickers from the manufacturer on nearly every bit of exposed plastic, proudly stating never obsolete, which was eMachines' marketing idea about selling you incremental upgrades to your PC to keep it current. It's kind of appropriate for Reese because he's just released a fantastic video from one of the UK's own similar retailers, Tiny, which was from roughly, a bit slightly earlier, roughly the same era of budget PCs when the price was being so very, very heavily pushed down by any means possible. And in fact, our friend Clint at LGR covered a very similar machine in specs from the eMachines one. I think it's the same, it might even be the same machine, certainly the same Celeron inside it, with the same marketing idea, but his was free. And because this is a podcast, you can't hear the asterisk. So I have to tell you there's an asterisk there. The idea was you took out a subscription and you got the PC literally free with the subscription, and then the upgrades came as well. This was the change in the 90s from going into the 90s with incredibly expensive IBM PCs to coming out the 90s with virtually free PCs with an internet subscription was incredible.
Lord Borak has posted a picture of a SNES repurposed as a postbox.
Is it repurposed as a postbox, though?
I don't know. Or is it just a wall ornament? Or is it structural? I mean, it could be. They were quite tough, weren't they?
Structural. Starcade 2084 tells us about C64 microtext, a programming language reportedly lost for 40 years. Perifractic at Retro Recipes explains that he beta tested it back in 1987, and it apparently wasn't seen again until now.
Juicy Cow lets us know that Google will now include the Internet Archive in search links.
I love some of the usernames we get. Pajako has a link to an open culture article about tapedeck.org, an archive of cassette tape designs from the 60s to the 90s. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they got much, much worse as time went on, and the cheesy 90s designs can get in the bin. Give me the 70s and 80s ones. They look absolutely top class.
Soggy Fennel links us to an article based on an Atari quote from CEO Wade Rosen. We never really led in any category, he explains. So we stopped and we said, okay, if we're going to be here, we have to be the best in the world at something. The first thing was to stop and say, what are we doing? What can we be the best in the world at? We looked at the brand, we looked at our internal capabilities, we looked at what we have passion for. What we came back with was retro gaming, and specifically modern retro gaming.
I think that's fair. I don't even think we need to disagree with that or add more to it. I think that's a fair thing for them to have said. And it's important. They talk about not being followers, not being a fast follower. And that's right, because there's too many fast followers out there. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've known him since he took over, and if you look at what he's done and that, he has jettisoned the weird ideas.
Yeah.
I think he got rid of the hotels and that, and just, as you just said from his quote, he's concentrated on retro. I think he, you can capitalize on it and that. And it's interesting to see what really does interest me. I mean, I'm obviously interested in my stuff, but their modern retakes on things like the Recharge series and how close they have to be to the original, like Missile Command Recharge and that. And that's an interesting way of getting a modern take on their retro classics. So, I mean, yeah, I hope to ride this wave for however long he's there for.
I think if Atari are going to be successful, then the Atari logo needs to mean something. It needs to be a brand, a stamp that if you see it, you think, well, this is a game that's going to be good because it's got that logo on it.
Well, I think half of their success is down to that logo. It's so iconic, isn't it? It's like McDonald's, Nike, Atari. I mean, you see it on. There must be millions of T-shirts out there with it on it. They're so blessed to have it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed some of the modern takes on the older stuff, like the Atari 50 collection. There was Vector Sector and Neo Breakout. I still play those. I do really love those games. And now, of course, we've got Neo Sprint. And yeah, I think they're going in a really good direction.
Yeah, I agree.
And there is loads more on the subreddit, which the URL for is Reese.
Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
Well done.
I'm getting good at this.
For this bit, I'm going to go very much against the narrative of the submission, at least initially. In other words, I'm going to disagree, because that's what I always do, with what it's highlighting, because it's told me something that I felt that was the case for a long time. So, anytime I've looked at how long a hard disk should last, I keep coming up with roughly the same time span. Time and time again, 3 to 5 years. And I've just Googled it as I've made my preparations and got these results. I'm quoting now. If you're looking for a short answer, the average lifespan of a hard disk is approximately 3 to 5 years. Another one, but 3 to 5 years is still about how long they last, whether you're talking about an internal drive for a server, desktop, or external hard disk drive. Another one, hard disk drives have more moving parts and are less durable and more likely to fail than their solid-state counterparts. For this reason, hard disks tend to last between 3 to 5 years. Now, last week we talked about circular references, and I think we have another example of it here. So, Duncan, get your bleeper ready, because saying that the average lifespan of a mechanical hard drive is 3 to 5 years, well, that's utter bull. Even in my own experience with my NAS, my network attached storage, and my various PCs, they last much longer. I did manage to find some better information, though. So this came from a blog on Backblaze, who really should know what they're talking about, because they do cloud storage. I've added to the show notes the link to the blog, and their data shows a steady failure rate on drives that roughly has about 19% failed by the 6-year point for one particular Seagate drive and 3% for one particular Hitachi drive. So if the nonsense was true, if it was 3 to 5 years, then on 4 years, on average, these graphs would show 50% failure rates by 48 months, and they clearly don't. But getting off of my soapbox, that gets us to today's submission, and it's from Colony Activist. It warns, and I should say it's an important warning, that 20% of hard drives used for long-term music storage in the 90s have failed. Now, to turn that around, what it means is that 80% of hard drives used for long-term storage in the 90s are still working, and that's a great figure if you ask me. But it does still show that there's good reason not to use hard drives for long-term storage. I've had hard disks fail in the past. but I've owned loads and loads and loads of hard disks. I've always run servers. I've got a server with ZFS on it just now, and there's 2 parity disks, so I could lose 2 drives and still be okay. And if you ask me, the answer to the problem is not to use a single drive for it. It's not to burn it to CD-ROMs. It's not to use tape backup. It's to use a proper, robust, off-the-shelf solution for a NAS that includes redundancy.
You're making me feel a bit nervous here because I've got a server in the loft, and I, on a yearly basis, collect all the videos and photos that we all take in the family, and I have them year by year in folders in the server in the loft. Now, the one thing I do is that I do put them on 2 separate hard disks. But it's interesting, these 3 to 5 figures, because I've seen that Backblaze website report every time. And I'm like, crikey, I've got hard drives in that loft that must be 15 years old. And they still chunter away, and it's on 24/7, 365. And, I don't recall one ever failing on me. So I think I always used to get Hitachi drives over Seagate and Western Digital, because in that survey, they seem to be better and longer lasting. So maybe that was part of the reason. But I think after this call, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to reorganize it all, and then. But what do you do? What should I do? Should I take it all off hard disk?
No, keep
leave it on there.
Hard disks are the answer, but
why not solid state?
Solid state will last longer. They're just a replacement for it. But I think the answer is to have a NAS with redundancy built in.
Yeah.
Either to buy an off-the-shelf solution like that, or to roll your own with Unraid or TrueNAS and have redundancy built in so that if a drive fails, you're okay, you can replace that drive without losing the rest of them. I think having the problem I have is having all your data on one thing, whether it's one DVD, whether it's one hard drive, whether it's one SD card. Having all your data on one thing is the issue there. So what you should have is a NAS. Now, RAID is not a backup. It's what's always said. RAID is not a backup. You should back things up as well to the cloud, I would suggest. A subset of what you have, or to a different hard disk and keep it at your parents', or to DVDs and put them in the safe. But I think having the data that you use that's live, it should be on a NAS in some form of advanced modern RAID rather than just individuals.
I could never get it working, RAID.
No,
that's why I just copied them onto 2 separate folders onto 2 disks.
You can get
too amateurish.
Like manual RAID.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Fine.
That's RAID 1. I mean, the chances of you losing it are maybe 1% in any year. And now you've got 2, so it's 1% of 1% of losing both. So you've dramatically reduced the odds of losing data.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it. But it did get me thinking, though, about all these old drives. And I guess there's a big difference between disks that get used daily for memory swap files, hibernation memory dumps, and disks that get seldom written to and read mildly. But in my old machines, I've stopped using hard disks. I started using CF and SD cards. But even they're not reliable as well. Sometimes they've got a microcontroller in it, and the slightest bit of a hiccup, and the microcontroller says, let's preserve the data and go read-only.
I have a big box of old hard drives here, which I won't get down from the shelf because it weighs an absolute ton. But as you know, I do like a show and tell, so I do have some things to show to you. So this is a mid-90s hard drive. This is about 1.2 gigabytes, I think. And this works perfectly fine. I fired up this PC, obviously, a few weeks ago. This one hasn't been used in, I think, 2002 it was last used, and that just fired up perfectly fine first time. And I also have this absolute chungus, this absolute unit. This is from an IBM. It's from an IBM PC-AT. So it's about
for those of you listening, Reese is holding up something around the size of his head.
Yes, this is getting on for 40 years old now. It's 20 megabytes, and that's kind of how the size compares to a slightly more modern one. But I suppose the point I was getting to is that these kind of consumer drives that I have, that I take out of all of these old PCs and stuff, I just keep them all, and whenever I need an IDE hard drive, I'll just plug it in, and they're just reliable. They just all seem to work. I mean, this this big old AT hard drive, last time I fired this up, that was still working. I know they do need kind of lubrication occasionally, but mechanical hard drives, I think, are pretty much indestructible. But that said, of course, obviously here we're talking about kind of, industry stuff about mass storage, and they're probably quite sort of heavily utilized, aren't they? So but I still think 80% is still quite an impressive success rate, really.
It's higher than what I thought. I thought they wouldn't last as long. So, I would say ignore the 3 to 5 year lifespan. It's nonsense scaremongering, but do get yourself a robust NAS, because who would want to wake up one day and realise you've lost the baby photos? On to the question of the week, and we'll start off with last week's. And last week was when Richard took over the show at the end of the show, and he said, he asked me and Reese to list the retro podcasts that we listen to, and he said, so we're asking you to do the same. So we'll go with the answers, and South Engineer 4702 says Retro Hour is fantastic and has incredible interviewees. The 3 hosts, Dan, Ravi and Joe, have a nice dynamic between them, and there's a good mix of news and interviews. Great show.
Yep, big fan of Retro Hour. And this second one from Computerist 1969, which is all the Amigos podcasts, except for Pixel Gaiden. Retro Hour is a great show, and I love the guest interviews. Factual inaccuracies are quite common, but you can get that info elsewhere, and the rest of the show more than makes up for it. I'm not so sure I necessarily agree with that, but that's all I have time for each week.
Christ of Why Do You says, my perfect console. Literally the only other podcast I listen to. Desert Island Discs, actually says Desert Island Discs for video games. Lots of varied with interesting guests, not only from the gaming world. I've not heard of that one. And that was the whole point of Richard asking. I mean, Richard was looking for more podcasts to listen to. I presume he listens to them while he works. And I know that Aaron from the Amigos podcast is always looking for more podcasts to listen to when he drives. So I'd imagine when he finally catches up in last week's, he'll be delighted. Tungsten Orchid has a fantastic list of
YouTube channels.
Some of these are YouTube channels, yeah.
Rather than podcasts.
So they're not ideal, but a lot of the YouTube channels you can almost have, like Adrian's, for example, you can have him on. You don't need to watch the whole thing all the time. Tomorrow's World Audit Time. Unimplemented Trap. Matt Chat. There's loads and loads of ones that I haven't heard of. I think I'm going to need to compile a list of these and somehow do some work with all these submissions, which I think was what Richard intended, and then see if we can get some kind of master list of podcasts that people have recommended, because I think that people are always on the lookout for something new to listen to. I know for me that when I'm bumbling about the house doing things, it's always nice to have something to listen to that doesn't need my eyes.
On that note, just you mentioned something slightly different. I just spotted that Osprey Shower has submitted a couple of BBC radio shows about the history of computing as well. So there's one called Computing Britain and one called Codes That Changed the World. So I'm definitely going to have to check those out.
Okay. Someone's mentioned Reese Rambles.
I never heard of him.
This week's question of the week is, Reese,
what should Plaion tackle next?
Rugby. Thank you very much for coming on, Ben. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's great to meet you.
I hope it doesn't cost you your job.
You'll edit those bits out.
We'll edit those bits out. The bits that the audience will never hear, where you confirmed exactly the runway for the next 3 years for Plaion and Atari. Yeah.
The Atari Falcon Plus. Ouch. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
The Turbo Falcon. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be back next week. Thank you again, Reese, for helping out while Neil is away. If anyone remembers Neil will be back in a few weeks' time. There is a break coming off of 1 week while Duncan goes on holiday. But after that, Neil will definitely be back, I'm sure. But anyway, that's it for this week. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much. They're waving. I'm waving.
He's waving.
Bye.
Bye.
Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.